A rare look at footage of the Beatles' only Indianapolis appearance and the fans who cherish their memories more than 31 years later. I'm Ken Owen. We'll remember a Fab Fair next.
Well, this week, amid a lot of hype, America is reliving Beatlemania.
A chapter in Beatle history was written here in Indianapolis 31 years ago, and a Wish TV camera was there to record it. John, Paul, George, and Ringo played 2 shows in one day at the Indiana State Fair. Ken Owen takes a special look back with fans and very rare footage.
Arriving at Weircook Municipal Airport, the Beatles got their first view of Indiana.
At that point in time, everything was the Beatles. You couldn't turn on a radio without hearing them.
The security precautions far more elaborate than when the late President Kennedy visited the same airport.
The Beatles were such an unknown thing that nobody really had any idea about what was going to happen.
They arrived on Hoosier soil in the wee hours of September 3rd, 1964, the year 4 lads from Liverpool conquered America. VICKI, BARTON, SUNNI, COLUMBUS, and Bonnie Britton were each 14 years old on that day. They were in this crowd.
On behalf of all of the State Fair Board and all the good guys from WIFB, may I present the Beatles!
Take a Pacers playoff game and multiply by 3. Only the pitch is much higher because we're not talking about, grown men screaming for a team. We're talking about, ah!
You couldn't really hear them real well at all.
Nerve-wracking, packed, kids everywhere.
There were 2 shows, each about a half-hour long. This one at the Fairgrounds Coliseum in the afternoon, another a few hours later in the Grandstand. Tickets were $3 to $5, expensive for the day, and they were hard to get. This is a dressing room in the bowels of the Coliseum where bands relax before they take the stage. To give you an idea how things have changed since 1964, nowadays you hear about bands that ask for all kinds of unusual things in their contract riders. The Beatles management kept it pretty simple. All they requested was a supply of clean towels, chairs, a case of cold Coca-Cola, and, if at all possible, a portable TV set. The biggest news might have been made after the 2 shows. In fact, when Paul McCartney returned to Indianapolis in 1990, I asked him if he had any memories of that day, all those years ago.
I remember a couple of guys went out with a couple of policemen and stayed up all night drinking. It's my memory.
Paul's memory is a bit foggy. Actually, Jack Marks and 2 other Indiana State Troopers gave Ringo a tour of the city, including the Circle and the Speedway, before taking the mop-top drummer to Mark's home for coffee and a Carmel restaurant for breakfast.
He really enjoyed himself as far as being out. He was having a little freedom, which he hadn't had for some time.
Marks, who's now retired and living in Noblesville, spent about 6 hours with Ringo, finally bringing him back to the Speedway Motel at about 7 in the morning, where Ringo was considered missing.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, they were worried about him, but he was in good hands.
The Beatles left town later that day with a send-off by fans.
I should be in this line. Wait a minute. Oh, I'm there somewhere. There's my brother. There's my little brother. My little brother Bob. Oh, my Lord.
The little kid there?
That little kid that just shook hands with him. That was my little brother Bob. Yes. My little brother Bob, who just turned 40.
I feel fortunate to be able to see a Beatles concert because there's not too many people that got to see the Beatles concert. I'm really lucky. Really lucky.
Looking back, it's like, wow, I got to go see the Beatles in concert now. But I definitely wished I'd been older to appreciate it more.
This was the high point of my life. And that 24 hours was sort of the culmination of months of thinking about the Beatles, about dreaming about the Beatles.
It's been 31 years, 2 months, and 17 days since, and the dreamers still dream. Ken Owen, Wish TV, News 8.
I recall Jim Curtis shot those pictures for Wish TV. Bonnie Britton, by the way, wrote an article about shaking Paul McCartney's hand for her school newspaper, her first. Today, she is the movie critic for the Indianapolis Star. Ken has more Beatle memories tomorrow night.
That's great.
Well, a media blitz is greeting the release of the long-awaited Beatles anthology.
Several area stores that sell music are staying open late tonight and hosting unusual events to mark the occasion. Our Anne-Marie Tiernan joins us from the north side now with details. Anne-Marie?
Good evening, Mike and Debbie. I'm at the Borders bookstore near Keystone and the Crossing, where they're counting down to the 12:01 sale of the Beatles anthology. They have all sorts of events here tonight and trivia questions and quizzes and everything. And the big winner of the trivia test tonight here was Jay Benjamin. And you know, Ken Owen just did a feature here on Channel 8 that had much of that 1964 video that you said that you wanted to see, that we have it here exclusively at Channel 8.
Yes, I'd sure love to see that. I know it's called Our Fair Beatles, and I've heard a lot about it. It was a documentary that Channel 8 made in 1964, and I think they may have shown it one time back then, and I'd sure love to see it again in its entirety sometime, even if it were 2 a.m. in the morning.
Sandy Patty with the Indianapolis Symphony Orchestra right after this.
On their way to selling 1 billion records, the Beatles were screamed at and chased. Will America ever again get so excited about a band? I'm Ken Owen. We'll examine that question and have more rare Beatles footage from Indianapolis coming up.
It's too bad. Well, 1964, America was still reeling from the assassination of President John F. Kennedy, and the nation had a deep fear of a nuclear confrontation with the Russians.
But that year, something new and exciting came along, energizing and defining rock music, launching the so-called British invasion. The Beatles made their one and only visit to Indianapolis in 1964. Tonight, Ken Owen asks the question, could another band ever repeat what happened then?
You think you've lost your love? Well, that's all there is.
It's like reliving your youth.
For many baby boomers, this week's refocus on the Beatles is a trip back to what may seem like a simpler, happier age.
It was the time they think everything was perfect. And now we look out and we see a world that has a huge crime rate. We see drugs, we see illegitimate children being born, we see families breaking up. This was all going on back in the 60s and 70s, but it was not focused. We didn't think about it.
Ladies and gentlemen, the Beatles.
It's been 31 years since the British invasion. Screaming girls, huge sales, near riots at every appearance by the Beatles.
It can't happen again, it won't happen again. These guys revolutionized music for everyone, for generations and generations. The closest thing that came to it is Michael Jackson, and that didn't last very long, and his influence is not there.
Sue STEINMETZ agrees the world, its communication systems, and our attitudes have changed a lot in the past 31 years.
If you had a similar group now, it would be a flash in the media, and then they'd move on to something else. It's like for a while we were mesmerized with O.J. Simpson. Now you never hear anyone mention it.
When the Beatles were the rage, pop music was an all-embracing format. You could hear Elvis, Dean Martin, Louis Armstrong, and the Fab Four on one radio station. Today, many formats fight for that audience. Urban, alternative, album rock, the list goes on and on.
Now you've got kids who can be going to the same high school who know nothing of the same music.
To follow the Beatles, fans had to wait for the occasional TV appearance or buy magazines. Today, with 50-plus cable channels, MTV, and the internet, bands really get exposed, and that can be a bad thing.
If the media anoints somebody as a superstar, there's immediately a group of people who come back and say, they're not any good, this is ridiculous, this is all media hype. I mean, media hype is such a big phrase now.
The fact is, 3 decades after they took the Indiana State Fair and the world by storm, the Beatles are still big, huge. Part of the group's lasting appeal may be in that they knew when to quit.
Well, and it may be they've been stopped in time. We think of them the way they were in the 60s.
To many of us, the Beatles are timeless. The years and fate can't change the fact that the long and winding road is still a fascinating trail of beautiful, fun, and haunting melodies, of yesterdays that still seem as fresh as today. Ken Owen, Wish TV, News 8.
By the way, the Beatles were paid a little less than $100,000 for their 2 concerts at the state fairgrounds and paid the state about $2,000 in adjusted gross income tax.